Hello, America. Welcome to Your Leo Nation, where, as you know, we believe in and support the rule of law. Without a rule, society is chaos. I spent 30 years in law enforcement, as you know very, very well. And one of the things that I came to really appreciate is the fact that there are people out there are organizations out there that support law enforcement and society in general while they're actually engaged in the free market. Along with the rule of law, I love the free market. I love entrepreneurs. I love people who take the risk, who who are innovators, who develop things that didn't exist yesterday, who refine things that weren't as good yesterday. And again, while they're actually making a living, while they're actually employing people, while they're actually bringing good things to individuals, they're also bringing good things to society as a whole. And we have one of those people on today. I'm so proud, so pleased as well to introduce Casey Russell, who is the president and CCO of Fusion Stack. Casey, welcome, and so glad to have you aboard today on Your Leo Nation.
Thanks, Mark. It's absolutely pleasure and honor for me to be here, and love what you guys do. And again, thanks for the opportunity to have a conversation with you.
It really is our pleasure, and we've spoken offline a little bit, and we actually got to know each other online and how we got acquainted. And I can't remember. I reached out to you. You reached out to me. I can't remember what it was now, but we've had a couple of really fun conversations. I remember the first time I spoke to you a couple or few weeks ago, which is about a 5-minute conversation. But one of the things I took away in that conversation, from that conversation, Casey, was just your very, very down to earth guy, very down to earth guy. And when I hung up or later on that day when I was talking to my wife about it, I said, man, this guy just sounds the real deal. In other words, an authentic individual. There was no veneer about it. And we were joking back and forth within about a minute of conversation, kind of making fun of ourselves to each other and stuff like that. And I tell you the truth, I really appreciate that. One of the things, when I was a cop, when I was a patrol officer, a lot of times, and people who weren't even happy they were getting a ticket, and even sometimes end up with handcuffs on, they say, I don't think I deserve this, but at least you treated me like a real person. You were a nice guy about it and things like that. And that was so huge to me. And so when I hear the people who I think are like that and who just don't take themselves too seriously, but they take their job seriously, I really appreciate it. With that said, I would love for you to tell me again, because my memory is so bad. And no, I'm only kidding. I've done a lot of reading on your company,
Right.
but for the edification of the audience, I would love for you to tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got to where you are, and of course, just give us an overview of the company Fusion Stack.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for the kind words, Mark. And it was likewise. That's why I was really excited to do this with you all. Yeah, we started, man, back in 2007 with this concept and idea of really how to help in the criminal justice system, specifically in public safety, to help our officers, help our courts try to be more efficient. And at that point in time, technology was still new. There was still a lot of paper and pencil and things. So we knew we had an uphill climb. We were told from the start that there's no way you're going to get both law enforcement and the courts all to agree to do anything with it. And in some points that was right, but we were dead set on doing this. And God knows over the 17, 18 years we've been doing this now, man, there's probably been a dozen times, at least half dozen times we should have quit and stopped with it. But something kept us going. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was, it wasn't smartness from a business side, but we were determined to solve a problem with it. And we kept going, had a lot of trials and tribulations that we learned from. Every great business leader will tell you, you will learn 10 times more from your failures than you will your success. And God knows we've had our fair share of them, but we've stuck through it and we kept going. And we took something from an idea that we just thought might work until to be the nation's leading product when it comes to the field that we work in with electronic warrants with our flagship product on it. So it's been a phenomenal journey. I learned a lot. We've been hands-on right in the middle of the criminal justice system, both from all sides. So it's given us a really good perspective from law enforcement to the prosecution to the court side, understanding all the little nuances of how these agencies behave and act, and it's really given us a really good perspective on what reality is versus what we see out there in the media, see out there on TV. So that's become a big part of what I'm trying to do now, and us as a company is get involved more with educating the public on, hey, this is what is really going on. This is what kind of these officers and these courts and stuff have to go through to protect the citizens of this country with it. So that's our mission these days, to continue growing as a company, continue pushing our technology in as many hands. Our goal is to get it in every single state in the entire country. We're at, I think, 18 states now. So we're driving every day to do that and try to help the men and women that serve us.
Well, you know me, with my background, I'm tempted to dive deep right now into some of those things you do with law enforcement, prosecutors, for law enforcement agencies, and we're gonna come back to that. I'm actually taking notes here because you're saying so many things. Oh, yeah, I don't want to forget that. I want to get this because the conversations I've had with you are so interesting, and I think are so relevant, so important for today, for
Yep.
society today. So I want to make sure we highlight those things. Going back a little bit though, can you tell us about just some of the from a technical side? Because it's not just the relationships with law enforcement. It's not just that. You are a general technology company as well with communications with again, I'm about the least technical person you want to meet, but you deal with information in a general sense, not just in with government side, but with private entities as well. Is that correct?
Yes, because almost everything we do, we have to integrate with the private side as well. So we're working with the agencies, but a lot of times we serve as a mediator or a middle person, middleware to take our data, but also exchange it with other private companies that need to get the data to the right people at the right time with it. So yeah, we spend a good bit of our time working with the private side. A lot of what we're trying to do now is get the public involved with sharing the data that the public knows inside of their minds, and how can we capture that data and get it into some type of format or medium to where law enforcement can interpret it, analyze it, and take positive actions on that data with it. So the technology today allows us to do that. 15 years ago, it didn't, but it's rapidly changing what the capabilities are from the law enforcement and the criminal justice side. So we're trying to stay on that cutting edge to meet those needs and add that value.
And Casey, can you share with us, in other words, your specific educational background, your training, your experiences that actually brought you to the point where you became, I think, one of the co-founders of Fusion Stack. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was one of the founding partners with it. Our CEO started, and again, our journey of how we got here, and it's really interesting. We could write a book on it with it, but yes, the whole electronic warrants concept we created again way back and to start that, and then it all branched off to where Fusion Stack does many different things now. But when it comes to the electronic warrants and all of that, I was one of the founding people that we put that idea together with it. But my background, graduated college in corporate finance and IT integration, it was called. Started off as a stockbroker, did that for a couple years,
Oh,
and just I guess I was too ADD for it, got bored with it, and I just said, "There's no way I can do this for the rest of my life." And I always had a passion for technology with that. So as I was doing that, we were tinkering around with. We started with video conferencing between the judges and the jails to eliminate having to transfer prisoners to and from the courthouses. Really saw the big boys get involved doing that back in the day. And it was like, look, there's no way we're going to compete with that. So we had to adapt. And right at that time, the whole electronic warrant concept came where we were sitting with a sheriff, local friend of ours, and it was day after Christmas or something. And they knew they had a suspect sitting in a house, needed to go kick down the door to get him, and couldn't find a judge. All the judges were out. They were on vacation or whatever the case may be, couldn't find a judge. And that's when we talked about, like, all right, sheriff, explain the problem. And like, we
Hmm.
have to write this warrant. We have to go find a judge, track the judge down, sit with the judge. We can't find the judge with it. I'm like, wow, this sounds kind of ridiculous with it. And hey, that's where it started. But back then, the laws didn't even exist to allow the electronic signing of criminal documents. So we had to meet with the legislators here in Louisiana, where we're based out of, and convince them of, hey, this is what we're trying to do. It makes sense. This is the value of it, and actually get the laws written and passed to allow this technology to even exist. Back in 2008, we went with this, and it passed unanimously, and then we were off and running.
That's interesting. See, I didn't know that you actually had to get legislation passed um, to make. And I'm I'm going to interject here a little bit about my history. Like one of the reasons I found this so fascinating when again we found each other online, and I started doing some research because when I was looking at all the electronic aspects of this, it hit home with me going back to the 1990s when I was a patrol officer. Actually, even deep into the 2000s when I was a field supervisor, and really in that sense I was dealing with this even more because I was signing off on a lot of this stuff, a lot of the correspondence with judges and so forth and so on. And, having my officers come to me as a sergeant and, hey, Sergeant, we need this warrant, this, declaration. And one of those things that we dealt with a lot, and again, you said you guys are in 18 states. And want to talk to you about maybe some of the differences from states because it's got to be a complicated issue. Obviously, each state has their own specific laws as it pertains to this kind of stuff, and what kind of work you've had to go through, maybe continue going through to keep the system streamlined. But in California, again, I'm ignorant about any other state in this regard. In California, back in the 1990s, there was a program that was instituted called probable cause declarations. And I don't know if you're familiar with that at all. I don't know if it exists in the other state. I have no idea. Is this something you're familiar with, Casey?
I'm pretty sure it's
O-
called different things in different places, but I'm pretty sure.
Okay. And we'll dive into that. And the reason is because this relates specifically to what you're talking about with the electronic warrants. So in California, again, this is, 1,000 years ago, I didn't need glasses. And this is after, my first couple of years, it didn't exist. And then I don't know, mid 90s, the PCD, probable cause declaration program came into fruition. And what that was is pretty much on every arrest you made, you had to fill out a PCD, probable cause declaration. You had to get a hold of the on-call judge in the county, or maybe there was a couple that were on call. You had to track them down. And by the way, they were on call, right? So you think they're sitting around with at that time, their landline waiting for a booking facility, an officer to get a hold of them. Didn't always work that way. But you'd have to call, and then you either have to read this declaration to them that you signed, or you have to fax it over to them. There was no scanning or anything like that, sending it over via computer. And of course, to this day, I don't understand the legalities, but I do. But I think that they're ridiculous because all you're doing is writing down the probable cause why you stopped this person, you took them into custody. It already says it on the face page of your your arrest report. So you're duplicating work, which California is very, very good at. But something like this, for me as an officer trying to go out and do my job, it just seemed like a godsend. Now, again, this is Warren specifically we're talking about here, but it's certainly related where you're actually communicating with the magistrate electronically, and you would think, pretty immediately and efficiently. So I just wanted to put that out there so everybody knows that I can really appreciate this. It's one of the things that drew me to you. Before we get specifically into that system, that I'm excited about. You don't have to name all the states, but are there some states that are more challenging to utilize this system in, or even to get implemented through the legislature than others?
Uh, some There's only one state that had specific laws that said you could not electronically sign criminal documents, and they're actually changing the law as we speak in that state. Everyone else through the previous years have adopted a federal law that basically said, hey, you have to treat the electronic version as the original version with it. And there's some states that have added additional language on top of that. We've got some states, Texas is a great example, where when it comes to administering the oath, the whole, hey, I swear to tell the truth and the whole truth thing, where on arrest warrants, that has to be videoed and recorded. So we have to build that, had to build that inside of the system, where on search warrants, they could be sworn in over the phone. We've got some states where the actual document itself saying, I swear under oath that this is all correct, that meets the requirement of the law. So probably involving the oath is probably the biggest discrepancy in the laws now. But like I said, almost every state in today's world accepts the electronic version as a legal version of the document. So we're past that burden. It's just some little small nuances now that kind of we have to deal with, but we've built all that into our system so we can handle the court pretty easily.
That's good. That's good to know. And I would imagine that your goal is to expand into as many states as you can absorb at a time. Is that correct, or am I getting ahead of the
Yeah, no,
game there?
yeah. Our goal is to go anywhere in the world that we can help. Now, I'll say anywhere in the world. That's that's the ultimate goal. But yes, we've built our system in a way, being that it's all cloud based, it's all SaaS. It's really easy for us to expand it with it. And we've become extremely good at implementing this pretty efficiently. But yeah, the value's there, the benefits there, it's unquestionable. Our track record speaks for that. So yeah, our goal is to get this as many places as possible.
That's great. I really do hope that, law enforcement leaders, decision makers are listening today, or, listen in the future when they hit their podcast platform of choice. Because look, I was a Chiefs California Highway Patrol, and like I started with earlier in the show, I am a huge believer in public private partnerships. And to me, to use a cliche is worn out, but sometimes a cliche is 100% right. I think the right public private partnership is a true win win situation. Law
Yeah.
enforcement can't do it all on its own. Law enforcement can't always do it as efficiently as a private sector entity can do. And by the way, when you think about it, virtually everything that law enforcement uses, every tool, whether it's a hard asset like a patrol car or a firearm or radar or lidar, license plate readers, or it's virtual, something like this, everything that we use in law enforcement comes from the private sector. But finding those specific ones that are actually really going in the same path, the same goal, yeah, I won't say it's rare, but it's not as often happening as I'd like to see. With that said, this I think it's such a great tool from what I can see. Casey, could you
Yeah.
actually walk us through a scenario, or a virtual scenario, of what it would look like from the very beginning, from a detective, from a beat cop, whatever it is, and through the process. Maybe you actually want to walk us through what the old way was with a warrant, and then maybe progress to where we are now with your system and what it's
Yeah.
called. I don't think we've actually said the name. I was leaving that to you, and
Yeah.
see how it works, what the process is actually like, and what it's actually for.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Starting off with what you talked about with the probable cause declaration for, and this is part of educating, especially on the public side, that, in order for an officer to come to your house, to come to your place of the business, to arrest you, to do a search or anything like that, that's not just an officer's decision. They have to make a case before a judge saying, hey, this is my investigation. These are the facts of my case. This is everything that I have that leads me to have sufficient probable cause to believe that this person, this business either has committed this crime or it's a place where evidence may be that is proof that they've committed this crime. So a judge will look at this and the judge knows that, okay, whatever decision the judge makes, that has to stand up in court if this is ever challenged with it. So an officer has to go through that. So in the old days, and even now, the people that still do it, the manual way, is that if I'm an officer and I say, okay, I believe that I need a warrant, whatever, arrest warrant, search warrant, whatever. I have to type all of that up. And today, hey, everyone now is in Microsoft Word or they're typing it up. I have to print it, go to my printer, look at it. I have to find out what judge is on call. Are they at the courthouse? Are they off site? Is it after hours? Is it a weekend? Are they at home? Are they at a restaurant? Are they at the camp fishing somewhere? Where is the judge? Then I have to go find the judge. I have to drive, park, go meet with the judge, talk to the judge, drive all the way back. And on average, you're looking at a 2 to 3 hour process that even if the judge is next door, it's still on average, you're looking at 3 hours. If you take an agency that does a decent sized US metropolitan city that may do 12 to 15,000 warrants a year, well, take 15,000 times 3 hours. You're talking about 45,000 man hours that your already understaffed department is spending in a car, driving to a judge, waiting to talk to a judge, driving back to the office. It is a complete waste of man hours and time, not to mention the cost of that. What's the average salary of a cop that you're paying, and multiply that by 45,000 hours and do those numbers with it? So that was the big thing that we saw. Not to mention, you start throwing on officer safety, because if I'm going to do a search on a building, or if I'm going to make a high arrest of a violent criminal, I have to have other officers that I put on stakeout that have to watch those addresses while I spend 3 hours going to do my job as an officer trying to get a warrant. What's the cost of all of those people? What about the officer safety of them sitting there watching that? So when you take all of that into account, that's when we really saw the value. So our product is called Cloud Gavel. It starts with the electronic warrant. So now, yes, the officer still fills it out, but he or she's filling it out online. Our system's 100% web-based. So as long as they've got internet access, they can do it from anywhere in the country. They can sit on their phones in front of the scene and type out this warrant. The system will tell them what judge is on duty. They'll send it to the judge. The judge gets an immediate message letting them know a new warrant has been submitted. Judge logs in. They can review everything depending on what the state laws are. They can call the officer right then and there. If they have to swear them in via video, they click a button inside of our application. It makes a live connection between the two, officer and judge. They swear them in. They can record it if they need to be. Judge takes action right then and there, and officer has the warrant. So we're doing 20 plus thousand warrants a month. We reduced that time down to 18 minutes. So we went from 3 hours down to 18 minutes. So not only did we give all of that time back to the agencies, but the officers, even when they're waiting the 18 minutes, they can still do other things. They can still do their jobs and work on other cases. And especially now, we know the unfortunate situation that almost every department in the country is understaffed. They're trying to figure out how to be more efficient. And we're giving them that. We're giving them that ability to use technology to really eliminate what we all consider as a complete waste of time. But unfortunately, or even fortunately, it's part of the law. It's part of the legal requirement. We're glad it's there. But the waste of time is just completely unnecessary today.
Well, I think you did an absolutely fantastic job of explaining the process. And again, for those people in law enforcement that are listening right now, obviously they're trained in most of them and understand the warrant process, the affidavit process, and how tedious it can be. But for those people who are new to the process, I think you gave a great explanation about how cumbersome it can be without using a system like this, and
Yeah.
all the aspects that go along with it. The officer safety issue and the resource issue are those are the two biggest issues. And I think you touched on it as well, but not to mention the integrity of the investigation itself, because time often results in things that deteriorate as far as evidence. In other words, you can lose a suspect, you can have a scene compromised. Things can happen as time moves on, and we can speed the process up. Obviously, you can better improve the integrity of the investigation. I think
Yeah.
it's a fantastic I think it's a fantastic system. And
Yeah.
of course, you work with obviously multiple agencies. So when I say multiple agencies, you're working with district attorneys. You're working with, I imagine, city attorneys, probably more DAs and city attorneys on warrants, generally speaking. I think, but and then of course different law enforcement agencies, police agencies. Another thing that we talked about when we talk about police agencies, you and I spoke about a little bit, is communication between agencies, because often investigations are going to overlap multiple jurisdictions. They're going to involve, you pick it, NYPD and New York State Troopers, or California Highway Patrol and LAPD, or FBI and a local law enforcement. So you can have multiple jurisdictions involved in the same investigations, and sometimes and often when they don't even know it yet. Of course, there can be
Yeah.
parallel investigations going on. And when those things are actually discovered, communications, it really varies between agencies and agent, and even officer and agent, officer and officer and deputy, whatever it may be. Can you talk a little bit? You did talk about this with Cloud Gavel, but about data sharing when it comes to interagency or multiple agencies, and how that fits into all this.
Yeah, absolutely. We all remember back one of the grimmest, most unfortunate days in our country is 9/11, right? And the excuse that was given to all of us was, oh, we didn't share enough data. We didn't know. The agencies didn't communicate. And unfortunately, all these years later, it's better, but it's nowhere near what it needs to be. So one of the approaches that we've always taken as a company is, how do we come up with a way to let each officer know what every other officer knows? There's so much data that in the old days it was in, and you'll know this, Mark, that is in a little black notebook. You always saw a cop take out their little black notebook and they start writing, right?
Yep.
All of that data is lost in that notebook forever with it. And even in today's world, where almost every agency has some type of records management system with it, data's now put into those systems, but they're still extremely siloed to those agencies. You could even make
100%.
yeah, we see situations where we've got neighboring agencies that are all fairly decent sized counties, systems, all using the same RMS vendor, but none of them talk to each other.
Mhm.
So you say, well, why is that important? Cops have jurisdictional boundaries, but criminals don't. And criminals know that. So if I'm a criminal and I'm in county A and I'm committing those crimes, or they're investigating me and they're searching for me, I just have to get outside of the county. And if I'm stopped on a routine traffic stop or any type of encounter, those sheriff deputies or police officers in County B has no idea that County A is looking for me or having anything to do with me on it. So we were trying to figure out, okay, how do we solve that issue? And it's a marathon. It's not going to be a sprint, but it starts with the basic collecting of data and making it visible to other agencies. So now when I'm a patrol cop and I stop somebody for speeding and I run that license plate and I run that name, I can see, hold on, this individual has multiple warrants out for them. And yeah, there's things like NCIC, and that's fantastic. Um, but how much stuff never makes it in the NCIC because it doesn't meet that criteria to get in there with it, which, that could be a whole nother conversation on NCIC, but it was, okay, how do we give the officers enough information to know who they're walking up on a routine traffic stop? When they're walking up to a house, what are they walking up to? What is the past history of those houses? And then even maybe the neighbor's house, just to give the officers a little more information so they can tackle that situation, appropriately with it. Not just from, is it a violent offender, but okay, am I walking up on someone? And you may know this, today cops are trained. Hey, every encounter you have to approach it as if that's somebody that may want to kill you. That's the reality in today's world. So people are like, wait a minute, I've never had a speeding ticket or any kind of ticket in my entire life. Why is this cop acting the way he or she's acting? That's why. So if we can give enough information to the officers before they even step out of their vehicle of what they're walking up on, it can play a role in how they interact with that individual in the vehicle or individual at the house or whatever the case may be. But we can't do that unless we have the data. We have to be able to share that. So one thing that gives us the flexibility is that we're all about data sharing. We're all about transparency with it. So we are making a strong case for all the agencies that we're in of connecting the dots, connecting the systems together, where we can have that central, we call it exchange, data exchange, where officers can get access to a lot of information that they normally wouldn't have access to that can help them make better decisions in real time.
It's great stuff, Casey, and people again, people in the business, so to speak, that are listening, they're saying, generally speaking, I'll say the same thing. Generally speaking, if there's a warrant for someone to arrest, things like this, those are generally in the system. Now, again, not always. There are some warrants that may not cross certain jurisdictions, but generally, a warrant for arrest, wherever it is gonna pop up. There are exceptions. I think that what you touched on, and I think that's really important. Actually, I'll ask a question specifically, um, is maybe information that is not in other words, hasn't come from an arrest, a conviction, things like this. In other words, FI or field interviews, those are one of the best tools that I think law enforcement has because you talked about silos in respective agencies. I know, at least for my old agency, finally we got to the point where you FI somebody, field interview them. They may not have committed a crime. They may be a suspect. They might be a witness, whatever it is. You can put the information in the computer. And so when you run the name within your own agency again, the person's going to pop up. Hey, they were contacted by officer so and so in Northern California and interviewed about this or suspected of this, whatever it is. Is that the kind of information that can be shared as well with what you're working on now?
Yeah. So two things on there. One is you're absolutely right on all major criminal warrants. Almost every single cop, you're right. Whether it's them in their cars or dispatch runs somebody, if they are a wanted felon, it's going to hit. It's going to hit an NCIC or the local system. One of the big things we're trying to tackle now is failure to appears, bench warrant. So let's say that I'm a violent criminal. I was arrested and I got out on bond and I have a court date that I need to show up at. And let's say I don't show up. There's a bench warrant that's issued for my arrest. I know I didn't show up. I know that I'm going to have more legal problems when I'm encountered by law enforcement. Even if my original warrant, so that original NCIC warrant was executed, I was arrested on that charge. So it's cleared in NCIC. I'm now in custody, but I've bonded out. So now I have just a failure to appear. If an officer pulls me over for speeding, the officer thinks, hey, routine speeding case. Me, I'm like, wait a minute, I've got a failure to appear warrant. I may run, I may take violent action against the officer. All these things come into play that officer has no idea about because the failure to appear warrants are not shared through NCIC. So that's one example. The second one is what you talked about with the field interview cards, and the way those play is that, let's say arson's the big thing. We all know that arsonists love to come back to the scene and watch what's going on, right? So if I'm a cop and I'm going around and I'm interviewing and talking to everybody that's sitting there watching, I may have the arson's name, but the arson knows, hey, I'm gonna just hop counties. And there's no way that they're gonna link me together. Where what if we've got a system where when I put in the witnesses' names or the people that are there looking at it, the system starts making these connections that, wait a minute, you've got the same witness on 10 different cases that's spread out across an entire state or even across jurisdictional lines. That's stuff that you cannot do today when all of this data is siloed, whether it's notebooks and RMSs, you lose all of that. So that's one of the big deals where when you're talking to witnesses, different people, suspects, you can make connections right now that you could just never do before. The technology is there to do it.
That's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. It's a tool that look, these things have been talked about for years, and I'm glad you brought up the FTA's. Sorry, the failure to appear. So those are one of the things that can slip through the cracks, of course. But I'm just so glad you brought this up in an offline conversation about the communication between agencies because it's something that uh, those people in law enforcement today and those that were previously in law enforcement, you are truly talked about for years about, man, if I had only known, if we'd only known, we could have put the pieces together. And after the fact, when someone is arrested later on, you go back, oh yeah, they were investigated, they were stopped, they were contacted, by this agency, that agency, and that agency. So I think it's a fantastic tool to help solve crimes, to help put crooks in prison. To put it as simple as that. As simple
Yeah.
as that. It's
And
wonderful
one,
stuff, Casey.
yeah,
But go ahead.
yeah, no, and one thing I'll add, Mark, that I think is such
Yeah, and by the
a ma-
way, please you add as much as you like because
yeah,
yeah, go right
a
ahead.
huge value here is that, and we talked about this online, was that yes, the goal is to give efficiency and value to our men and women of law enforcement, the criminal justice system. But the other side was just as important is to add a level of transparency to the public to say, okay, yes, we do have the rule of law here that governs how these agencies and officers have to behave, and protecting the public was equally as important. Where,
Mhm.
in the old days with paper, you can basically you can make the paper say whatever you want the paper to say, right?
True.
Now there's no hiding it.
Mhm.
Especially like in our system, we have a very detailed audit trail from the time the officer starts the warrant and every single action that is taken on that document from the beginning till forever. So there's no more of, hey, when, who did what and when did they do it? The system tells you that. So we've got a ton of positive support from the defense attorneys, from the public defenders. They're like, hey, now when I've got a case, I can get a detailed export of the audit trail, and I can scratch off police malfeasance right off the bat. I can look at the time, date, and stamps of everything that they did, compare them to the documents, and then compare them to the actions the officers took, and I can validate right then and there, did the officer follow the law? Did he do, or did he or she do what he's supposed to do under the law? Yes or no? So we've encouraged, because of that, officers, you have to pay more attention to what you're doing, how you're doing it. You can't cut corners. You can't cheat the system with it. So that was just as important to us, of not only making better use of taxpayer money and saving taxpayer money, but also ensuring that officers were following the law and protecting the rights of the people.
I want you to forgive me for not watching you here a little bit because I'm taking so many notes. You're
Yeah.
making
No,
it's man, great point. One of the things certainly today and when I was around is the public trust issue. And my God, the number of promotional exams I took, and I probably the last four of them, it was so public trust heavy, and it should be public trust heavy. Law enforcement has to earn and maintain the trust of the public, and that's been quite a challenge the last few years. And I think a lot of it is completely unfounded. And you talked about that earlier. It's one thing, what the media says, so what the media promotes versus reality. And you and I both know that so much of what people hear is at the very, very, very best a distortion, if not an outright lie from topic to topic, from incident to incident, but certainly a distortion. I'll be nice about it. But this being a tool, like you're saying, that even defense attorneys are happy to have. Maybe some of them aren't. They would like any possible way to discredit an officer. But the fact is, a legitimate, an honorable defense attorney should like something like this, where they could actually look at the chain. They can look at the chain of evidence. They can look at the correspondence between officer and a magistrate, things like this. That's really unassailable. This should be a good thing for the court system.
Yeah.
And I'm so
Yeah.
glad you brought that point up. It's a public
Yeah.
trust issue.
Yeah.
And a lot
Well,
of
and
agencies, some more than others, actually need every tool that they can muster to regain public trust, to maintain public trust. And it's one more reason that, I'm a
yeah.
fan. I'm a fan of what you're doing,
Yeah.
Casey.
Well, and to add
Go
to
ahead.
that, Mark, is one some of the few challenges we've gotten is, okay, are you making it too easy for law enforcement to get these warrants to arrest people, to do searches? And I said, well, you've got two types of challenges to any type of criminal case. You have the process, or you have the merits with it. The process is simple. Is the law clearly defines what the process is that an officer has to go through before they kick down your door, before they
Mhm.
slap handcuffs on you. They have to go through a process. How is it any detriment to the citizens to making the process more efficient? There
Right.
is none.
Right.
The challenge comes on the merit, and that's what our defense always is, and it works really well, is that we're not we're not disrupting the merits of the case. If the officer doesn't have probable cause, if the officer makes up facts or things of that nature, that's why the judge is there. And even
Right.
if the judge is wrong, if the judge is lazy and doesn't do the judge's job, that's why we have an appeal process. That's why it goes to court. That's why we have prosecutors that look at all of this stuff with it. So it's really important for people to understand that there's both sides. There's process and there's the merit of the cases. And for our side, hey, we can't control what officer put in these things. They have to do their job and they have to be trained properly to do it. And everyone is part of the criminal justice system. But when it comes to the processes, that's where people like us, private companies, we can really do a lot to make that more efficient and save time and money.
That makes sense to me. And you explained that very well. This just makes the process, which is already part of the law, more
Yep.
efficient. Doesn't change anything other than that. Casey, do you spend, pardon my dumb question, let me rephrase that. How do you go about interacting with law enforcement, whether it's prosecutors or it's police agencies? In other words, as sharing what you do. Do you do a lot of in-person presentation either to decision makers or to law enforcement groups in different counties? How do you get the word out about what you're doing?
Great question. The majority at this point, we do direct outreach from the business world. You know, there's so much junk email now that
Yeah.
you send all the email you want. You're going to struggle to get anybody to pay much attention to it. With it, same kind of with social media. Everybody's selling everything on social media these days. So for us, it's still direct outreach to them. And you know as well as anybody, age officer cops trust cops. So for someone like me at this stage, which is a lot different than when we first started, is that when I call and we reach out and I can say that, hey, we've got over 500 agencies that use our system, they're not questioning whether or not we know what we're doing. And when I talk to them and I say, hey, over all these years, we've never had an agency quit or leave us. We've never lost a client. That answers all of, hey, how do you support and take care of your customers? How do you support and take care of your product that you're selling to us? When I can say that no one's ever left us, that answers that question with it. And a big part of what we do is controlled growth because we want to make sure that we don't grow so fast that we can't support it. So we've done a really good job with that, and that's because it's a lot of direct outreach. We do attend conferences and things of that nature, and a ton of word of mouth. Probably the majority of our business comes from cops saying, "Man, I was in that county next door, and they were doing this, and I was blown away. How do I get me some of that?" So that's a big part of how we expand. But yeah, it's still, I'd say, frustrating. It's amazing how many times, Mark, after all of this, we still have people say, "Man, I wish I'd have heard of y'all 3 years ago. I never knew this existed." So
Mhm.
there's still a big part of the country that has no idea this technology exists.
Look, I'll plead ignorance or I'll plead guilty. Pardon the pun. I didn't know. I
Yeah.
didn't know until a few weeks ago this existed. I'm glad I found out. And from what I can tell, I'm not on the inside anymore. I actually can't use the services, but from what I can tell by reading this, and certainly that that testimonial that you've never lost a client, I don't know if it gets any more powerful than that, Casey. I really don't. But you certainly struck a nerve with me as an ex-cop out. Man, I wish this tool had been around when, I was a pencil and paper. I think it's
Yep.
fantastic. Thanks for being a wonderful guest. And thanks for being a great partner in law enforcement. Thanks for being somebody who's working, in my opinion, towards a betterment of society and make a safer society while you are building a business. I love entrepreneurs. And again, we can find entrepreneurs that are helping us be safer as a society. It's a win-win. I'm a happy guy. Before we leave, Casey, I've been dying to ask you over that shoulder of yours. I think it's over your right shoulder. Could be backwards here on the podcast. What's the jersey I'm looking at? I can't see the insignia on the shoulder.
That was my Senior Bowl jersey. So I played a little college ball, went to Tulane, and I got selected for the Senior Bowl. Had a very, very brief stint in the NFL, but I can say that, hey, I made it there with it. So that's just some of the things I keep debating. Do I do green screen? Do I different things? And everyone always tells me, no, leave all that.
Leave
It's
it.
a good conversation piece. So yeah, it's I just have some of those things up in the office, and hey, that's got
That
a little time there. Met a lot of great people, but yeah, that's the story behind it.
also Fusion
Long
Stack,
time ago.
Electronic Wards, Cloud Gavel, football, NFL. And as I can tell just by looking at you, obviously you've had a very successful career in hair care products as well. You look
Absolutely.
fantastic.
Yeah, I've given up on that. I've accepted defeat.
You did have some clients leave you in that regard. I understand that. I get it.
Yeah, hey, I'm not in the fashion business or TV, so hey, just have to deal with it.
Fantastic. Casey Roussel, last thing I'm going to ask you to do is give a pitch for your company. How can people find you? How can people contact whatever it is, the platform? How can people find you that need, and I believe that need what you're offering?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks. You can just go to cloudgavel.com. That's the easiest place to go to the website. On there, you can schedule demos right from the website. You can call us, any type of reaching out, even if it's just questions about, stuff you've heard on, this show, this conversation with Mark. Hopefully this is the first of many that we can talk about here. But yeah, cloudgavel.com, everything is there. Reach out to us. We're more than willing to give you all the information that you need and help explain the whole process to you. And again, be there to help. That's our goal, is to assist and help in any way that we can.
Fantastic. It's been our pleasure, Casey, and we will be talking to you soon.
Yeah. Thanks for everything you do, Mark. Great show. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you.
You're welcome. Thank you.